in the region. And I'm very glad to be here today with Sajid and Mafriki from the AU and from Search for Common Ground respectively. And to all of you who have joined us, and I look forward to a productive and fruitful, also interactive deliberation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Sajid. Thank you, Mafreke. Thank you, Mohammed. Before we start this conversation, I think it's appropriate to just provide some kind of background into why we are here. Before 2015, young people used to be seen as perpetrators of violence, victims of violence, people who really did not have something meaningful to contribute to sustainable peace and development. But of course, there were a lot of young people who were already leading initiatives targeted at preventing conflict, building peace and sustainable development across the world as at that time. And that, of course, led to the formation of a Youth for Peace movement, which tried as much as possible to change the narrative of seeing young people from a deficit side. We had the Amman Declaration sometimes in 2015 in Jordan, where young people gathered to strategize on how to shift, the narrative from a traditionally deficit side to an asset-based side. And one of the recommendations from the meeting in Jordan was that there was a need for a policy framework, especially at the United Nations level, that would provide the needed guidelines and framework for young people's participation in peace building and sustainable development. And that led to the adoption of the UN Resolution 2250 in December 2015. Before that time, or after that time, we've had so many progress, so many milestones. Now, young people are using UN Resolution 2250 to access space. Young people are using UN Resolution 2250 to seek for partnership, to ask for funding, and do so many amazing things. And in 2018, again, the United Nations reaffirmed its commitment to youth peace and security with the adoption of Resolution 2419. And now, recently, last month, the UN adopted a third resolution on youth peace and security. And this is some of the things that we're going to be looking at, what all these resolutions mean for young people and how we can use it to sustain the momentum that we have built. And the African Union is also not relenting. We've had all the development at global level also translate into some kind of regional and continental development. The African Union is also leading a Youth for Peace Africa movement, which we're going to be hearing from the Youth for Peace representative here in our midst. And also similarly, last month, the African Union adopted a Continental Framework on youth peace and security. We're going to be hearing all this and more from all our speakers. So I'm going to be calling on the first speaker now, who is going to be speaking to us for 10 minutes. And it's no other person than Sajid Prelis, who's going to be talking to us on the newly adopted UN Resolution 2535 and its relevance for youth peace building. Sajid will do all that in 10 minutes. Over to you, Sajid.
Sure. Thank you so much of you. Can I share my screen by any chance? Because it says I cannot share. Is it possible for you to allow me to share my screen so I can do a PowerPoint quickly?
Okay, let me see if I can do that.
While that is being set up, just to make sure I don't waste any of your time. Again, thank you for having me, and really great pleasure to also share this space with my colleagues, Mafreke and Mohammed as well. As I said, I'm Sajid Prelis. I wear two hats with Search and the Global Coalition itself. Rafiu gave a really good fun synopsis of the global YPS agenda and the progress made. What I wanted to highlight from all that was two things. One is the YPS agenda globally with the Security Council didn't come from the Security Council itself. The impetus came from over 11,000 young people from 109 countries really advocating, saying, we are sick and tired of being put in a box as troublemakers or victims only. A new narrative must be heard and recognized, and that is about us as partners for peace. And that was a powerful moment that helped shift the narrative on this. The second is this idea that we only look at young people when they cause trouble. When we know that vast majority of young people don't cause trouble. So that we had to force ourselves to ask a new question. And the new question was, why are most young people peaceful? that also helped anchor the global white peace agenda itself. Am I set up for sharing the screen? Fantastic. Let me share this. Can you see my screen now? Rafi, you or somebody, can you confirm if you can see my screen?
Get it shared.
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. So this idea of young people, why are most young people peaceful, was fundamental driving question that helped us quite a bit. And we talked about the policy landscape. Rafi did a really good job sharing the two resolutions. What I wanted to highlight from that was 2250 and 2419 versus starting point to look at young people, not just as musical entrepreneurs or cultural entrepreneurs, but political actors. And that was what was the driving factor for these Security Council resolutions. So the third one was adopted on July 14, 2020, co-sponsored by the Dominican Republic and France. France being a P5 member, which is a permanent member of the Security Council. What does it actually do? So there are 4 or 5 key things that the resolution calls for. One is increasing protection of young people and their civic spaces. Second is it recognizes the agency of young people in humanitarian response as well as COVID response also. Third, it establishes an accountability mechanism through a reporting process to the Secretary General as to report to the Security Council every 2 years. Fourth, it provides for youth inclusive peace process and strengthens the role of young people as political actors in peace processes and decision making itself. Allow me to now quickly unpack this a little bit and share some key progressive statements that have come out. One is this idea that diversify of youth participation in peace processes, including participation of women, refugees, internally displaced people in peace processes itself. Oftentimes that is not the norm. South Sudan, it became slightly of a norm, but it is not the norm. So this Security Council resolution, it provides a progressive language around the role of young people in peace process, especially young people who are refugees, displaced people, and others. Second is that it recognizes the structural barriers that limit participation of young people. And that's important because this is something that it gives governments to also now recognize the structural barriers hinder the young people's participation, and in itself becomes a form of violence it's also. Third, it references protecting civic space and political space and condemns hate speech and incitement of violence. So it's a progressive language even for the Security Council to go in that direction. Fourth, is the Security Council for many years has ignored climate change for a variety of reasons that powerful countries don't want to recognize climate change and deny science. Here, it dances around this by providing interesting language that I've highlighted here, talking about increasing frequency of severe weather events and natural disasters, and the role young people play in preventing and responding to this is recognized. But what it does also is links climate change and violent conflict and young people's roles as peace builders to bridge that divide as well. Without talking specifically about climate change, it gives us breathing room to actually act on it, which is very interesting and important. The other is around the psychological support, meaningful participation of youth in reconstruction, and the role victims play in the reconstruction process and development peace process itself is important. And it squarely recognizes the role young people play in this. And lastly, also, it encourages youth participation in the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of the youth peace and security agenda. We've had global, we will hear from my colleague Africa about continental, but ultimately what matters is when it comes to country level. And what this does is provides a framework for operationalizing at the country level. And it shows that young people are critical for the national, local implementation of the youth peace and security agenda. So to accomplish this, there are a couple of things that we need. And the resolution highlights is that young people need to be in the driver's seat in these processes. No longer can we see makers. It's high time that governments, international organizations recognize the powerful role that young people play and the partnership that they need in engaging on this. So the second is how to do it through partnership. Third is that the member states have to make greater commitments to supporting young people because there's a reporting mechanism for this. It helps us hold governments accountable. Fourth is again, for the first time, it says we can't just do things for young people. We need to put money behind our action and finance young people's work more critically. And the fourth is that we need to move away from global policy frameworks to making sure that ultimately where it matters is at the national level and the community level. And that's where it matters. And we need to focus our attention and resources on local and national action. And that's what the next step of the global agenda is on youth, peace, and security. I'll stop there. Happy to answer questions and be part of this discussion. Thank you again.
All right, so thank you very much, Saji, for that brief summary of the various components of the UN Resolution 2535. Saji talks about the fact that the new resolution focused on the protection of young peace builders, focused on the question about human rights, the question about the role of youth in climate change and humanitarian issues. Without wasting much of our time, for those who have questions as regards Saji's presentation, just hold your questions. We're going to create room for that. We want to maximize our time as much as possible. So we'll go next to Mafreke now, who's going to be leading us through the presentation on the AU Continental Framework on Youth, Peace and Security, providing us information as regards what the African Union is doing to strengthen young people's participation in peace processes. So Mafreke, you'll do that in 10 minutes. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Rafi, and thank you, Saji, for setting the stage. My job here is basically to draw complementarities between the Continental Framework and the new Resolution 2535. And maybe like Saji also indicated, I will start by saying that the framework also was not just an AU thing dumped on youth. It actually came from a request by young people post-2250 adoption. The AU convened a meeting in 2016, October precisely, and the African Union Youth Envoy, who was part of that meeting, and massive young people across the continent, are amongst the diverse recommendations requested for the African Union to craft a continental framework that of course aligns with Articles 11 and 17 of the Africa Youth Charter. For those who do not know it, I will encourage you go to read it, but also in line with the new resolution, of course, which was then 2250 across the 5 pillars. So from formation, the conceptualization process of the framework in 2016, more delving into 2018 when we had the launch of the Youth for Peace Africa program. Young people across the continent were brought into the room, so they formed the conceptualization process of the framework, and they were involved at every stage, including sending the drafts to them for inputs, incorporating those inputs, which led to finalization. Of course, before presentation and adoption, they had to validate the framework. The Continental Youth, Peace and Security Framework and its 10-year implementation plan. So we had to finish the crafting of the framework itself, the narrative portion, and under the guidance of our Peace and Security Council, which is the highest decision-making body of the AU when it comes to peace and security, just like the United Nations Security Council, advised that we develop a 10-year implementation plan. So the 10-year implementation plan is derived from the framework. And like I said earlier, the framework itself is made up of or derived from the 7 broad areas of Article 17 of the Africa Youth Charter, which covers issues of prevention, participation, humanitarian efforts, human rights, protection of young people, post-conflict reconstruction, recovery, and disarmament. And of course, the 5 pillars of 2250, which is participation, prevention, protection, partnerships, and disengagement and reintegration. The framework itself is a normative guidance to member states, to regional economic communities, and to the relevant AU agencies and institutions, to foster that mainstreaming and meaningful participation of young people in all areas of peace and security. And what Saji has said, which is very key for us in the framework, is that we want to use the framework for member states to begin to develop national action plans. So that framework is a guidance to the domestication of youth peace and security agenda at member state level, what I mean at country level, but also at the regional platforms. It also seeks to foster coordination and collaboration. So whether with the UN, whether with the global coalition such as mentioned, whether with different civil societies across the continent. That exist on young people. The same at the regional levels, but also the African Union one. But most importantly, also reflecting on the UN which the fifth priority area talks about peace building and resilience. The framework also identifies, key challenges faced by young people, young peace builders in the work that they do, but also the gaps that exist. And this informed the elaboration of the 5 pillars of the framework. The 5 pillars of the framework has a little bit tweak on the partnerships pillars. So whereas the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 leaves it at partnership, it has partnerships and coordinations, but every other thing is within those 5 pillars. It's broken into these 5 pillars or priority areas, as the framework calls them, which is participation, prevention, protection, partnerships and coordinations, and disengagement and reintegration as key program milestones, which is being elaborated on the 10-year implementation plan. It also has cross-cutting recommendations, to foster enabling mechanisms for implementation, which looks at issues of inclusivity, capacity building, gender mainstreaming, effective communication, and generation and dissemination of knowledge management products. It also has criteria, for effective programming on youth peace and security. Strictly on joint complementarity now. As Saji has indicated, and Saji, thank you very much for taking the stage, because it helps me, draw key elements from the framework that resonates with 2535 across those 5 priority areas. First for us, if you look at the pillar under participation, it talks about inclusivity for young people's participation and representation at all levels of decision making. The framework goes on to say we should include strong appointments of young people into key decision-making processes, but also supporting their elections into key political spaces, in recognition that we need to be within the key governance and political spaces to bring about the much-needed changes young people envisage. It also talks about that development of national action plans, like I've said earlier on, to domesticate the agenda. We can't keep talking about it at the global level or the continental level. The UN or the AU is not going to do all the work. So it boils down to member states and the young people owning, and as Saji said, driving the agenda. So I would always call on young people to seize the momentum, to be the key drivers of change that they want to see. It also talks about eliminating those structural barriers, and Saji has mentioned, and we hope that this can be done, including through, appointing these focal persons at national levels amongst the young people, but also encouraging coalitions like you have the building blocks for peace working around. I know that Nigeria has this national coalition on youth peace and security agenda, and I think Rafi, kudos to you and the team for that work. So it's about young people coming together, putting away competitive nature, but working collectively, to do what is right, and working together to achieve what you want to. And at the AU level, we've taken this a step further to appoint 5 regional youth ambassadors for peace, 1 from each of the 5 regions, to be able to begin to engage and sit at that key level decision-making process. And we've tried since their endorsement in February to bring them, mainstreaming them in everything that AU does with regards to peace and security. As Saji also said, the 35 also talks about preventive actions. And I think what for me is very important about 2535 is that it's not a departure, but rather it builds on 2250 and 2419. So that strong linkages are there. So when you talk about issues of prevention, the framework encourages, sustained support for youth-led preventive actions, including their participation in peace processes and supporting them in trying to address the structural causes of violence, including through formal education, but also vocational training, to reduce those vulnerabilities that can make them, easily ended to issues of violence, extremism, issues of crime, and other social vices. And we are working with the African Youth Ambassadors for Peace to address the structural causes of violence, in that they'll be developing projects in collaboration with youth in their region to address that. On the partnership and coordination pillar, the framework really calls and supports coordination effectively and communication with diverse actors at the member state level, at the regional level, at the UN global level, at the continental level, but most importantly, with the young people. And as Haji said, we need to begin to do the talk. It calls for provision of sustained finances for young people's efforts in peace and security. So it is no longer enough to say young people should do this, but it's in empowering us and empowering member states and giving that clarion call to say, we need to provide the necessary financial resources that they will need to do the work they do. In either case, this is in complementarity to what member states will do, what the African Union will do, what the regional economic communities like ECOWAS will do, to promote sustainable peace and security. But not just at the financial level. We need that political clout and leverage, that space to operate, and also the technical support when needed. And at the AU, we're already working, to create this robust continental and regional platforms, but also working to have maybe an annual General Assembly, but also coordination meeting with youth, member states, RECs, and the AU to design and work together on youth peace and security issues. On the protection pillar, of course, the framework recognizes that the rights of young people, but most importantly, they need to conduct their operations within safe spaces. So it calls on member states to guarantee some level of protection for young people to do their work, including opening up the civil spaces and in compliance with international humanitarian law, international human rights law, but also against sexual and gender-based related violence, which is also a key thing. And this, the 10-year implementation metrics or plan gives us credence, including trying to engage and sensitize law enforcement agencies at member state level on the rights of young peace builders, so that none of this is trampled upon. And if it is, we could use, legal measures to seek redress. And last but not the least, one of the key things I see on 2535, which is very key for us on the framework as well, is promoting the inclusion and and encouraging the spaces are open for young people's participation and engagement in issues of preventing and countering violence, extremism, post-conflict reconstruction and development, humanitarian assistance, and especially because we've seen young peace builders during the times of COVID, rolling out massive support, whether it's relief and food or non-food aid. And I'm happy that Mohammed from Liberia is here, because I'm also sure that during the Ebola pandemic in 2014, 2015, and I know that young Liberians rose to the occasion, young Sierra Leoneans rose to the occasion, young Guineans rose to the occasion, and across the region of West Africa. But also, disarmament, demobilization and reintegration process, but most importantly, providing physical and psychological recovery for victims of armed conflict, but also, or victims, or I like to call them survivors of armed conflicts, but most importantly, those who have survived sexual and gender-based related violence. So this is in a nutshell what the similarities and complementarities are between 2535 and of course the Continental Framework. Thank you, Rafiu, and thank you, Mohammed and Saji. Back to you, Rafiu.
All right, thank you very much, Mafrike. If I had this space, I would have just given you a round of applause, but that is not possible now. Of course, I know that a lot of us are already thinking, it's the meaning of all these resolutions, all these frameworks that we're having here and there. And now we'll go straight to Mohammed, who is another interesting young peace builder based in Liberia, to give us some kind of, closer interrogation of all these resolutions and what it means, especially for young peace builders within the continent. Since the adoption of Resolution 2250, we've not really had any of the countries within the continent having a national action plan on it. Maybe for Nigeria, that is, working towards that, about 70% ready, but we've not really had many of our countries, many of young peace builders within the continent still do not even know about the existence of this resolution. Now we have a second one. Now we have a third one. What do we do with all this resolution? What are the next line of actions for us as young peace builders? So we'll go straight to Mohammed Foboy now to lead that presentation in 10 minutes before we begin to, interrogate ourselves, and we'll open the floor for further discussion. So over to you, Mohammed.
Okay, thank you very much, Rafael. I thank you to Sajid and Mafrikid for the brilliant presentation. I think you guys have set the stage, and many of the things I talked about that I was supposed to talk about have already been said, especially by Sajid, when it comes to action and roles of young peace builders in making sure that resolution 2535 and all the other previous resolution in the Continental Framework on WRPS is achieved globally, regionally, and nationally, but also locally. So as you all are aware, so the Continental Framework on WRPS and also 2535 on WRPS, these are all policy documents. They are now binding on member states of the United Nations, the AU, our regional economic communities, and regional mechanism on conflict resolution, prevention, and management. So young people now need to set the stage. They need to take ownership of all these policy documents to make sure that they become practical to all of the priority areas or the actions areas are stipulated within those policies. So one way to do that is to first consolidate our resources and effort. We need to join hands with each other. Congratulations to Rafael and team there in Nigeria. Now they have a national WRPS coalition on WRPS in Nigeria. UNOY, we have just concluded our regional strategy, consultation strategy for the next 5 years, and we have outlined 3 or 4 countries. Nigeria already has a national coalition, so Cameroon is the second country, and from there we're coming to Liberia and also Sierra Leone. So these are 4 countries first. Nigeria already has a coalition, so we're going to provide the necessary resources and support for them. And Cameroon happens to be a conflict area. Sierra Leone happens to be Cameroon happens to be a conflict area in Central Africa. So we want to provide the necessary support and also build on their resources and expertise there to help establish a national coalition on WRPS. Then within the next 2 to 3 or 5 years, Sierra Leone and Liberia will be conducting elections. So we want to engage our regional stakeholders and national stakeholders also to make sure that a national coalition on WRPS is established in these 2 countries. So one way to do this, as Saji said, is to take local ownership. Thanks to the AU now for domesticating Resolution 2250 and the 2535. Now they have a continental framework. But again, we have to engage our national institutions and all of those UN nations in our country for them to be accountable to everything that is said in those framework or in those policies document. Those priority areas, those action areas, we need to hold the UN system. We need to hold member states accountable to make sure that they implement those things. And we need to, now stand against the issue of tokenism. all of these priority areas, and at times member states attempt to provide some sort of token to young people. We must understand that young people, we are not unique in terms of demographic. No, we are not unique. So the issue of intersectionality, young people, we have refugees, we have youth with disability, young people are female, male. So we need to understand all of those things. And even in Africa, especially in Africa, there is a strong level of discrimination against let's say gays or lesbians or transgender youth. So we need to stand up against these things and consolidate all of the necessary resources we have, join hands with each other instead of us operating into splinter group and doing our own thing, because with that, we're not going to achieve many things and we're not going to achieve anything, and people will not take us serious. But if we consolidate with our national youth organizations, and thank God we have a representative of the Federation of Liberian Youth here from the President's office. So we need to work with all of these national youth organizations for them to engage our national stakeholders and government, but also all of these are regional economic communities, and all of those mechanisms are regional mechanisms that have been put in place to make sure that 2535 is achievable, it becomes practical, and it impacts the life of young people. In making sure that resources are provided to them. And thank God that now the issue of climate change, the issue of pandemic and other health issues are all included within 2535 and the Continental Framework. So we need to take ownership, we need to organize local action, we need to be very genuine to ourselves and advocate for all, for everyone, irrespective of their sexuality, irrespective of their political, their religious and economic background, to make sure that everything that is said within those documents are practical and are all achievable. So we look forward to working with all of you across the continent, across the globe. UNOY is always available to provide whatever resources, especially in terms of advocacy, in terms of lobbying with other regional institutions, global and multilateral institutions. As you are aware, we have the IAT, that is the African Youth Advocacy Team. We have had 2 missions to the AU, advocating for the regionalization of 2250, and now we have 2535. We have had a mission or some engagement with ECOWAS, and we're working now with different national institutions and nations or delegations within national or countries, since we understand that for the African sector, a lot of organizations, they work bilaterally instead of regionally. So we want to leverage all of those opportunities, but we need the support of young people. First, we need to show that, yes, we are ready before other people can take us seriously. So thank you, and any other further question, I look forward to interacting with you.
All right, thank you very much, Mohamed Foboy. For those who do not know, Mohamed Foboy is the regional coordinator for the United Network of Young Peacebuilders in West and Central Africa. UNY Peacebuilders is a global network of over 100 youth-led organizations who are working on peace and security, and UNY accepts members from all over the world. If there are youth-led organizations on this call who are interested in associating or joining the UNY network, you can go online and check the website for the membership link, and Mohammed will do justice to your application. That's by the way. There are a lot of questions already popping up in the chat room. We're going to give room for our speakers to respond to each of those questions. I hear Mohammed talking about young people's ownership of the new UN resolutions, and of course the AU Continental Framework on Youth, Peace and Security. From the experiences that we've had with 2250, I think that education is key at this time. Awareness is also key. It's important for us to start raising awareness about the existence of all these resolutions. And one of the essence of this conversation today is to mobilize young people and kickstart national conversations, regional conversations around the existence of this resolution and subsequent domestication. I expect that participants from this call, especially those who are leaders of youth-led organizations, will also see how to step down this kind of conversation within their own context and among their own audience, so we can start building momentum from our own side. So while I want our speakers to start looking at the chat room and checking the questions and preparing their answers, I would like us to have a brief break so we can take our group photograph so our speakers can prepare their responses to the various questions. COVID-19 cannot deny us such opportunity. So participants, please put on your camera, put on your videos. Let's take group photographs before we continue the conversation. All right, thank you so much. Khalid, we're waiting for you. Stephanie, Dami, Raphael, Ihunruziza, thanks for joining. Please put on your camera. Okay, we're getting there. Dami, put on your camera. Stephanie, put on your camera. Okay, thanks. Dami, we're waiting for you. Stephanie, we're waiting for you. Obasi, Kautumi, Marshall. Okay. Stephanie, Dami. Advise you to smile so that when you see your camera, when you see your pictures on the internet, you won't start complaining. Just smile a little bit. Okay. Without wasting much of our precious time, I would like to thank you so much for the compliance, and then thank you for holding forth. There are so many questions in the chat room. One for Mafrike, one for Saji, one for Mohammed. I'm sure all of us can read the questions and respond to it appropriately. Without preference for anyone, Saji, do you want to respond to some of the questions that is being asked here? The first one says, how do we promote a local action that aligns to global policy framework on YPS? That's by Joaquim, Jos Nigeria. Okay, there's another one. Okay. Please pardon me, I'm having issues. Okay, says, can you share your details and Twitter handle and the slides later? Of course, we're going to take the slide from Saji and we'll share with everyone. So Saji, maybe you go ahead to respond to that first question, and if
sure,
any other, I'll bring it to your attention again.
I think there was a couple of questions. I'll try to combine them.
Okay, great.
Joaquim's question about how do we align? I think it's a very important question. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it mean that nothing happened, that the tree didn't fall? No, the tree fell. So what I'm trying to say here is that we need to be able to connect what is happening in Jos, Nigeria, in the Middle Belt, all the way to New York and Addis Ababa. And that link is not often straight, which means that we need each other to make sure that this is by using existing hashtags, for example, but we all need to be part of this process. Constantly we hear that we don't understand young people's work. Second is that is the work that young people do around peace and security, is it making an impact? 3, what is that impact and how do we understand that impact? Oftentimes the work of young people and the impact they have doesn't get translated into policy circles. So we need to link this up in a way that makes sense. And that's where collective voices matter. So translating that collective voices requires that, always when you produce a paper, an evaluation, or a report from a project, use the hashtag Youth for Peace. And I'll put it on here as well. So that way we can collect those things and be able to amplify them. Always retweet or reshare other people's work that amplifies the positive role that young people are playing, and make sure. And then as we get more and more connected with the UNOI peacebuilders and others, we are able to then not only understand the work you're doing, but also provide you a platform to speak at the regional or continental or global level at different events, so that the conversation doesn't revolve around a few usual suspects, but it goes deeper than that. So those are important. And the last thing, the question that was asked around how do we make sure that the work that young people are doing is part and parcel of the reporting mechanism of the Secretary General. This is an important question also. If we don't advocate, the chances are that young people's voices will be marginalized, and the voices of the UN and voices of international NGOs will take more prominence. And that will be a huge disservice to the great work that young people do. That's why it's really, really critical that we don't assume that it will happen. We need to constantly advocate for this. And the advocacy can come with the different partners, the regional organizations, continental and other global organizations. Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security could be one platform for that. Information about this can be found on youthforpeace.info, and I'll share that as well. But it's really, really important that UNOI and others will play a role in harnessing and capturing the work as part of the consultation for reporting, so that there's a balanced approach of recognizing the role of young people, youth-led groups, international NGOs, national organizations, and the UN in equal footing. Because this YPS agenda is not a UN agenda anymore. It is not an international agenda, it's a local agenda. Why? Because change really happens where people live. And that is where you all are. So if we are talking about amplifying and recognizing, it is what your work that we need to be amplifying, not what international organizations do. So it's important to really make sure these levels of connections are connected and make sure that we are amplifying these things. I hope that provides information, and I'll provide the links on the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saji, for that very sharp responses. I will go over now to Mafreke. I'm sure you must have gone through the questions that apply to you. Just respond accordingly. Mafreke.
Okay, thank you, Rafi, and thank you for the questions that have come in. There was a generic question, I think, from Okello, where he was talking about how we would work around fostering refugees and internal displaced persons, participation. And I think I tried to respond to that on the chat. But to say that the UN resolutions on the framework kind of really capture and try to promote the meaningful participation and engagement and promotion, of support, whether socioeconomic opportunities and, political support for people who are displaced. And I think as we engage member states towards implementing these frameworks and policies, this will definitely be a key area of concentration for us. And I can tell you already from among the Youth Ambassadors for Peace we have, and I think this was one of those encouraging phrases you put in application, call for applications, and people possibly thought we were just trying to promote the participation of refugees or internally displaced persons. But especially given when we did the call for applications for the Youth Ambassadors for Peace, it was an AU year where we're looking at addressing the plight of displaced persons, which was 2019. And one of our Youth Ambassadors for Peace is an internally displaced person in his country. The other one once had a refugee status. So we understand this, and we would really work with them to see how we could promote and foster that the participation of refugees in the work that we do as young peace builders. And we already are engaging a lot of refugees and displaced persons across the continent on the work that we do. We did a study last year, and which Monet, who is on this call, was one of the consultants for the Southern Africa region. we had a lot of people, selected from the refugee spaces, from the IDP spaces to attend those consultations and already begin to showcase what they are doing in their own very different spaces, working to address tensions within refugee camps, but also between refugees and host communities. So we'll continue to advance this effort as much as we can. The question from Loretta, thank you so very much. There are a lot of policies we agree, and that is why we're saying that in working to implement these policies, the UN or the AU would not implement it solely at the continental, at the global level. It is then working in collaboration and in support with member states. So for instance, Rafiu has indicated, and we've already provided some inputs on the draft National Action Plan for Nigeria, is how do we engage member states in such that when they're developing national action plans on youth peace and security or reviewing their national youth policies, some of these elements we want to see are incorporated. So the national action plans should be derived to a large extent from the national youth policies, which most of them across the continent, when I did a review in 2018, they already have issues around peace, security, conflict prevention, what have you. So how do we mainstream and infuse this aspect, components of youth peace and security agenda in those national action plans or national youth policies so that it's easier to implement at that national level. But I also agree with you that young people who play diverse roles, and Saja has tried to highlight some of them. When we did a continental study last year, some of the things we found out is that young people are working as early warners, and providing collaborative efforts to security agencies. For instance, I would use the G5 Sahel youth movements across the G5 Sahel countries. They are working to see how they can provide daily support to security agencies, including tipping them off when they find anything suspicious, also trying to bring relief to those communities, acting as watchdogs or some security agencies. Recently, in February 2020, the government of Burkina Faso, the parliament passed a resolution where they said they've set up what we call the National Volunteers for Defense. These are predominantly made up of young people who are being trained and incorporated within the security spaces. So they're acting as early warners, but they're also providing some level of security operations, like maybe warding off insurgents from their communities. And I think the same also applies to a large extent with the youth components of the civilians joint task force in Nigeria. So young people are already trying to do this. I think it's just working up to scale up their supports and really recognize it, because as Saji said earlier on, the stereotypes of young people being harbingers of violence or violence vehicles through violence are driven needs to be changed. And I think that continental study we did last year, but also the global study, the missing piece, I encourage all of you who've not ready to read it, really begins to bring to light the roles, the formidable roles, you can't even begin to imagine what young people are doing. So we need to put more light on those positives. And with time, we will definitely, eliminate the negative stereotypes or the stereotypes that are bound. But I think, Loretta, also is to say that the year 2020 at the African Union is that of silencing the guns. And silencing the guns means a lot of things. Not just silencing the active violence on the continent, but more so preventing new violence from erupting. We launched at the continental level what we call the Youth Silence the Guns campaign last month, officially, but this has been things that have been out there informally, formally, but we needed to do that official campaign where we're encouraging young people to stand up, to take actions to working collectively to eliminate violence on the continent, but most importantly, preventing new ones from arising. Monet, you've asked, I'm happy you're part of the youth peace and security agenda broadly, but the question is quite interesting. How do we make the implementation of the Continental Framework COVID-proof so that we do not have delays as we go on? One thing we're trying to do first, as Rafi mentioned, is more of advocacy and popularization of it right now. You can't begin to implement things that people are not familiar with. So the first step for us is, even as a lot of actions are being done virtually, is to begin to sensitize the population, sensitize the member states. In a couple of months, we are planning a continental level meeting with the 55 countries of Africa, at least the youth ministries, to begin to bring down all of those policy frameworks to that level where they can begin to relate with easily and walk around domesticating and providing those supports to them. But we also want to sensitize the young people. And Rafi, I want to thank you for doing this, because people can begin to see the similarities and the synergies between the diverse policies that exist, whether at the continental level or the global level. So we want to begin to sensitize young people, but provide support where it is. Already, as I mentioned, Nigeria is taking the lead, and I think across the continent, I can categorically say it's only Nigeria so far that is working on a national action plan. So we're already providing that support to Nigeria, AU and ECOWAS, to see how we can enrich the draft national action plan, but in line with all of the different policies that exist. So we are also working with the regs, and I want to be very frank to say that one of the things we did at the continental level was to encourage the regional economic communities to all forward on domesticating or coming out with youth policies on youth peace and security, because we wanted to work with them collectively to have that continental blueprint in which they can begin now to domesticate based on the peculiarities in their region. So we're already working with a couple of those regs to see how we can begin to domesticate those. So Monet, at this point, it's more of sensitization advocacy, doing more of the paperwork, supporting the development of different policies at regional levels, at national levels, and hopefully begin to scale up the implementation. Hopefully COVID passes, with the vaccines and all of that sooner enough. But at member state level, whatever we can do on the ground, we will do eventually to eliminate or to disseminate the framework and ensure its popularization, but also its implementation. Thank you.
All right.
So,
thank you very much, Mafreke, for that very comprehensive responses to the various questions addressed to you. I would open the floor for Mohammed now for his responses, or if there's anything he wants to add to the various submissions by the two speakers that have spoken before you. Mohammed, do you want to say one or two things?
Yeah, so I'm looking at a question from our Chris. How can the indigenous people, farmers involved or get involved in the policy formulation and implementation? So one thing we need to do is to engage. I mean, before the formulation of all of these documents or policies, we need to engage the different communities, and young people have a very active role to play. We need to popularize, create awareness, and advocate. In Africa, we need to see that indigenous groups are involved in the formulation, that breaking those formulations down or simplifying them into indigenous languages. Let's say, like now, all of the different policies document, even the Continental Framework, have they been simplified or translated into indigenous languages other than the continental or global languages that are new or recognized? So that's one way we can get them involved. We need to advocate and lobby with national stakeholders and state actors to get them involved by reaching out, and not just within the urban areas of our different countries. We need to make sure that rural communities are benefit and they are reached in the formulation of these policies, and not just the formulation, but when the policies have been endorsed and approved, they also get involved in the implementation of it by breaking it down, simplifying it, and putting it into their indigenous languages that for them to understand. Maybe infographic, maybe radio programs. In many of the countries, we have community radio stations, so we need to reach out and leverage those opportunities. And another question from Victor Barlow: how can the young people be more focused on sincere service to humanity and country than being gullible to police and brutal missionaries missionaries of deceitful politicians? COVID-19 has offered a very a greater opportunity for us, and it is a crisis, but we can take opportunity of it and now and empower ourselves. There are a lot of opportunities arising from COVID-19. There is now a greater amount of educational opportunities, especially on massive open online courses, MOOC offers by university and other institutions of learning around the world. So let's make active use of the internet by empowering ourselves, because as long as you are empowered, no politician will see you as a tool. You will decide who you support and what time you support, or in terms of how you support whatever politician. We must also be able to support each other. If a young person is involved into politics, we must not see politics as a game of the old or of older people. It will be a very bigger mistake if we look at politics like that, and young people are not supposed to participate in politics. So if you are there, you'll be used by politicians. If you are not in the game, you will not be able to change the rule of the game, and you will not be able to influence many of the decisions, because nowadays in our society, many of the decisions are political decisions. So if you are not represented there, you will not be able to influence those decisions for it to impact your own community. So we need to support each other. We need to leverage our demographic strength for positive things and not always for violence. Our participation in politics must not just be about posting campaign flyers or attending campaign rallies, or just being member of youth league. We must hold active positions within those political parties, and we must even now be sounding ideal with politicians that before this happen, this must happen. We must be given some seat around the table and not always be being placed on the table to be talked about. So yes, Victor Ballard, we can leverage the opportunity of our demographic strengths by supporting each other and by actively participating in politics, but to our own benefit and to the larger benefit of the entire community in our different countries.
All right, thank you very much, Mohammed. I mean, your points are well received. I hope that, members find it applicable to their work. One of the important lines that I took from the report that was written after the first international symposium on young people's participation was that young people would either inherit the benefit of today's decision or the consequences of it. So if we're not included, and whatever decision that has been taken, we are going to be faced with either the positive benefit, or the negative consequences in time to come. So we appreciate your response for that. Just to drive in some of the important things that have been said by the three of you, I think going forward from this meeting now, especially for our colleagues who are joining from other West African countries and Central Africa, I think what is important now is to begin to foster cooperation, collaboration among ourselves. The in thing now is the formation of networks, formation of coalitions. No single organization can do it alone, and I think that is one thing that has helped sustain the momentum internationally. You have the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security. Giant peace building organizations are coming together to drive the agenda. I think that we can also do the same thing within our own national context. In Nigeria, we have started discussions with the West African Network for Peace Building, for example. We've been collaborating with them for the past 2 years now. And with the way the discussion is going, I'm not sure they can escape from it. They cannot escape from it. The partnership is strong. Before we joined this call, rather, we are also connected with the UNDP Nigeria team, with their representative from UNDP Africa, discussing how to design a youth program for young people in the Sahel. And so UNDP is also closely working with us. So I think that other youth leaders can also do the same thing within their own context. Let's see how we can drive it. If you don't start it, nobody will start it. So I think that as youth agents, the core responsibilities on us to kickstart the YPS debate, YPS movement in our own national context. I wouldn't know, there are so many of us on this call. We have many of the representatives of WANEP. I wouldn't know whether Mrs. Patience will want to say one or two things. Patience is the head of programs, OneUp Nigeria. I wouldn't know whether our Patience want to say one or two things before we take closing remarks and we end the conversation. Patience.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lawal. I must say a very big thank you to all the speakers who have made today's webinar a success. I've learned quite so much on today's webinar, but one key thing that resonates and strikes me is that we have 3 outstanding YPS resolutions now from the Security Council. How are we going to domesticate these resolutions? Because for me, I see that the UNSCR 2250 is a key resolution calling for youth involvement in peace and security, and the other supporting resolutions should be what could serve as a building block to what we already have on ground. And if we intend to have a national action plan, I think it should be on 2250, then the other resolutions will be supporting resolutions. Then how do we go ahead to localize? Are we localizing just 2250, or are we going to localize all 3 resolutions across board? So these are questions that are drumming up, and I would like to seek the advice of our resource persons, our guests, to be able to help in proving a way forward on how we proceed. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Patience. Before I allow our speakers to do justice to that, Allwell has also been complaining that he wants to, ask questions. Allwell, are you here? Can you push forward your questions so our guests can take them all together?
Thank you so much, Lawal. I wanted to ask Saji what he thinks about young people's participation in eliminating or responding to COVID-19. I saw a mention of it in the 2535 resolution, but I didn't think it was expansive enough. So I wanted to find out what he thought about it. Then in Freke, you in your bio, I found out that you work also, you're a convener for West Africa. I think recently a number of violent extremism has increased in some parts of West Africa, and I still feel that it affects the perception that youth organizations in West Africa are being portrayed. It affects the way they are portrayed. So what do you think about the situation in West Africa in particular, and how it can be alleviated? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Allwell and Patience, for that intervention. I would like to say that on our own part, Building Blocks for Peace Foundation, we are working closely with OneUp Nigeria on a project. It's a documentation project, book publication, that titled Connecting and Amplifying Youth Voices using Storytelling. And the whole idea behind that project is to use it to celebrate the 5th anniversary of 2250, which is slated for December 2020. And what we want to do is to capture stories of, what young peace builders are doing in the north and in the southern part of Nigeria to use as an advocacy tool to prepare grounds for institutional acceptance of the national framework, national action plan on 2250 that we're also currently supporting. I know that other organizations will also have 1 or 2 things to have in mind, but if you have not started preparing for it, the 5th anniversary of 2250 is still some months away. I encourage that you design something at least to raise awareness about this resolution within your own national context, and of course to kickstart discussions around the entire youth peace and security agenda within your country, your state, or at local level. If you need technical support, advice, guidance, all our 3 speakers are available. I'm sure youth peace and security is their life. That is what they do. But if you want to connect with us closely, you can also reach out to BB for Peace. We're happy to also, help in whatever capacity that we can. So I will hand over to our speakers now to respond to the last 2 questions by the one by Patience from OneUp and the one by Allwell, and of course take that as their closing remarks. Saji, over to you.
Thank you, Raphael. Thank you, colleagues and friends, for your questions and also commentary as well. I shared the Youth and COVID paper link that we produced. I hope that gives you an opportunity to read that. One sentence I can say about COVID. I think it was mentioned briefly as well. What COVID has done is a great equalizer, because it has showcased very powerfully who the most important, most powerful, life-saving people are. Most important people are not politicians, but a grocery clerk, a healthcare person. Majority of these people are young. And what it has done was equalize it. So people have shown that these people are the lifesavers. It doesn't matter how big your weapons are, how rich you are, these are the most essential people. I think that's a powerful place to build, to make sure that the role young people are playing in post-COVID, Ebola kind of crisis world. There's a role that young people play is recognized. But now, translating this global YPS agendas, continental literature, it's really clear that we need to act on them. I just want to reflect on a key things as I close. One is that we can't localize global efforts unless there is a powerful incentive to think about actually what it means locally. It's not, I personally feel like, it's not important to translate a Security Council resolution to Jos, Nigeria, or Central African Republic, in Bangui or outside of Bangui. What is critical is what peace matters to them locally. And looking at using the policy frameworks as background and context, but ultimately, this is a local issue and it has to be geared from a local perspective. This is the role of young people across this continent who can play a powerful role. Use the policy frameworks, but not localize them, but localize what peace and security means locally to young people. That requires a set of collective action. Rafi mentioned also there's a lot of guidance available. I shared a link as well, but it comes down to trust. We need to get away from these competitive models that I want money, I need to do this, I need to get recognition, I need to show this and that. That actually is not going to change peace and security. We need to move away, and COVID is an opportunity to think of a new way to collaborate. And that's where the trust is really essential. And if we can't trust each other in our youth groups, we can't trust each other with the UN or international NGOs and youth groups, then I think we are failing ourselves. So the starting point is how can young people trust each other and come together collectively to shape a powerful force for good in the local context. And that's important. Third is around the funding itself. Without funding, this is not going to move forward. The Global Coalition and Search for Common Ground, we are actually in the process of setting up the Global Youth Peace and Security Fund. The progress study talked about an aspirational goal of having $1 per young person in the world. That comes to about $1.8 billion. And the fund is something we are setting up. So it doesn't become part of the United Nations or the World Bank or international NGOs, but an independent fund that will actually support young people's efforts. We know that the average of annual income of a youth-led group is around $5,000 to $10,000. 64% of them operate with $10,000 or less. So if we are providing $10,000 grants, imagine in a geography like West Africa, how many grants we can give to young people. But it's not just about giving money, but providing the 360 support so they actually can take that and become powerful and influential without making them NGOs. This is another problem that we need to really talk about, is that financing doesn't mean that we have to make youth-led groups NGOs to access money. That takes the power away from young people and puts them in the hands of international organizations. That's problematic. So the fund requires us to think of innovative ways to support young people without NGOizing them. So there's a whole process and a strategy. I'm happy to talk to you all about this. And fourth is, lastly, is we're learning this in the United States, and I think in Cameroon, there is an interest in this, looking at national legislative action. And how can young people and youth actors work together to create a legislative agenda that incentivizes governments to also create a legislative agenda. The United States government is in the process of approving a legislative agenda on youth peace and security that will also support financing and all that. So we have a model of how we did that to get the very political, very controversial US government to support youth peace and security. I think we have a template we are happy to share with anybody else who is interested in creating a legislative agenda in the country level. And we're happy to support that. But more importantly, thank you for taking the time to listen to me and inviting me to be part of this. Happy to contribute and encourage you to engage on this, and happy to be a resource. And I'll share my contact information again. Thanks again, Rafi.
All right. Thank you very much, Saji. I appreciate your time and all that you have said so far. For those who do not know, you cannot talk about youth peace and security in the world today without mentioning Saji. Saji has done so much and given his life to the entire YPS struggle. So we appreciate you, Saji. It will also interest you to know that about 2 weeks ago, the government of Nigeria approved the establishment of a youth fund, about 75 billion naira for the next 3 years. 25 billion naira every year. That is intended to also help push youth empowerment, youth development at the core of the government of Nigeria. We hope that this will go a long way in supporting our work and that the disbursement will be done, free and fair without any unnecessary nepotism and corruption. I would like to call on Mafreke for our closing remarks. Mohammed, begin to prepare. Then we have another big name on the call. We, just like Mafreke said, the African Union recently appointed youth ambassadors across the continent, and we have the representative for West Africa also joining this conversation. We also like to hear him speak after Foboy. So Mafreke first.
Thank you so much, Rafi. I think this has been a very interesting and exciting conversation for me, and I'm happy I could join. It's always a pleasure to listen to Saji. As you said, Rafi, more of the father of the YPS agenda globally, you know. But also it's been very interesting learning from Mohammed, and I'm happy to know he represents, he's from Liberia, and I know that the Liberians have been working incredibly well. And I look forward to sustained conversation with you on that regard. I'm also happy to hear from my former colleague, Patience. And Patience, you've raised good questions, and I think I just sent a link to the Continental, the PSC communique, the first of its kind on the youth peace and security agenda in 2018, when they asked us to do a lot of things on the YPS agenda. That clarifies the question you raised on, are we developing national action plans based on 2250? And yes, we are developing national action plans based on 2250. It's just 2250 is just like 1325, is the forerunner. Every other resolution falls within. So the PSC was very clear when it encouraged member states to develop national action plans on 2250. And of course, like I said, that is what the framework does. So the framework domesticates at the continental level 2250, but also bringing from the Article 17 that already exists. So I think that it's clear. And Mohammed, you mentioned something about, you know, finding creative ways, you know, to popularize and disseminate, whether it's the framework, whether it's 2250, whether it's the study. And yes, we're trying to do that. You mentioned infographics. We're working with partners to, you know, do infographics on the framework, but also on the study that we did, so that people can easily relate with it. But we're also working on an audiovisual documentary, you know, showcasing the positive contributions of young people, not just on peace and security, but also on COVID. And I'm happy, Saji, I shared a link about the COVID and young peace builders interventions. We also had a webinar last 2 months, and we've tried to document that. And Monet, please, if you could share the link of that policy brief, which was supported heavily by ISS. So we could work around that. We're trying to find creative ways to disseminate and share this policy document in a way that is not very bulky. People may not be willing to read through all the pages, though I always encourage to read. You know, you can break it into pieces, read one that interests you for today, next tomorrow you take on, you know, you could just form that reading culture creatively. But to Awal's question, Rafi, I'm coming, you know, I had a couple of questions around preventing and countering violent extremism. And I think this is where we need to work together to change the narratives. There's been those stereotypes, and Saji, you know that to a large extent, 2250 was premised on the stereotypes of young people being agents of violent extremism. But I'm happy to be able to turn 2250 and the subsequent resolutions around positively to change that narrative. Young people are agents of change. Young people are those tools through which we could bet the most incredible changes. You know, we could disrupt positively. And when I say disrupt positively, in that they are the most potent population on the continent. Like Saji said, maybe if you want to build a credible mass movement, either you're following hashtags or this, those are spaces you find young people. But we also recognize that a lot of them are not online, majority are offline. So it then boils to working with those at the community levels to bring those changes. And I try to mention some examples, whether it's young people within the Civilian Joint Task Force in the Lake Chad Basin area of Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger, who are working to support and complement the efforts of security agencies as early warners, as protective, acting as watchdogs to ward off extremist tendencies, but also trying to, begin to inculcate in young people, their peers, that culture of peace. We also have that happening in the G5 Sahel area, right? We are also beginning to see a new group of young people working within the Southern Africa hemisphere, where we've seen issues of violence extremism on the limelight in the last couple of months, almost a year or more than. So we are seeing young people mobilizing in North Africa, to prevent and counter violence extremism. And the study, once it's published, I will share the links with you guys, and Rafi, please do well to send it along, across, is that we're seeing a lot of, spaces where youth are involving themselves within the preventive and countering violence extremism, space, which I think a challenge was that perception that it is a domicile of security agencies or state actors, but that is not the case. The ECOWAS plan of action, which is being developed, if I'm using West Africa as an example, for preventing and countering violence extremism in the Sahel, elaborates on 8 priority areas, and youth are mainstreamed. The same thing with the LCBC Regional Stabilization Strategy developed by the African Union and the Lake Chad Basin Commission, mainstreams women and youths across the 9 pillars. So we are not seeing young people as just acting preventively, but we're also seeing their roles in countering violent extremism. So I think some of these frameworks provides this space for young people, provides that platform for young people to begin to engage. And if I want to say my key farewell words would be for young people to seize the momentum. The YPS agenda, whether globally or continentally, is huge. We've had key political weeks, at national levels, at regional levels, or at the continental level, or globally, lending their voices on how they feel young people should begin to drive the agenda for peace. And this goes from little things like peace education, whether informal or informal spaces. I'm happy UNEP is here because maybe patients in another conversation can talk more about the UNEP policy guideline, on mainstreaming peace education, either as an independent subject or an integrated one, informal peace education, spaces in schools. And that is also what the AU Peace and Security Council is asking. We need to begin to build a culture of peace. And maybe to say that, to advise young people to say, we need to move away from that space or that perceptions of we are competing with each other to working together. No one is winning. This is not a trophy that you would say, oh, Saji is going to be a herald the Saji himself would tell you he couldn't have done anything on the YPS agenda without the collective efforts of the global coalition, especially with the UNOY. So it's important that we move away completely. There's that need for that paradigm shift from a competitive space to more that of a collaborative one, because it's only that way that we would be able to drive any sustainable changes within the youth peace and security agenda. The African Union remains committed to support. The regional economic communities remains committed to support. And we are now beginning to see how we would work with the national youth councils. And I must say, while I'm driving the message home about competition is that even within the national youth councils across the continents, there are so much tensions that the people who are supposed to be advocating for youth empowerment, youth inclusion, youth participation, a small cohort of people are actually depriving a large majority of that space. So we need to put away the issues of competition. We need to work together collaboratively. if there are issues, and there will always be disputes when different people come together, there are always peaceful ways to channel it. And for young peace builders, and I think Mohammed is here, these are things we tell the youth ambassadors for peace. You cannot want to build peace, and when within your small space, you are unable to transform disputes. You cannot be talking about the elder statesmen, and say they're creating all the problems when within the youth space. And I'm using the National Youth Councils as a point of contact. We are having so much tensions, so much divisions. We cannot build a youth peace and security agenda that way. So it's just to encourage you to seize the momentum that applies at the continental and global level on youth peace and security agenda, but begin to own the process, own these tools, work with the AU, work with the UN to popularize, to sensitize people on these policies, because it's only when you sensitize them, they can begin to come on your, and work with you. If they don't know it, they will not implement it. So they need to own it, they need to know it, and begin to work with you to implement it. Thank you very much, Rafiu, Saji, Mohammed, and all of the beautiful colleagues for the timely interventions and engagements. I really enjoyed my time.
All right, thank you so much, Mafrike. Mohammed, your final remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Rafiul, and to Mfriki and Sajid for sharing all of the different policies. And I believe all of us in here in this session today, we are young peace builders, so we are somehow involved with different organizations surrounding the YPS agenda. So I want to urge all of you to kindly read those documents. We cannot in any way try to advocate a lobby with other stakeholders in implementing these policies and framework if we don't even have an understanding of what the policies are. So let us read them, let us digest them, and let us share them with other stakeholders, with other youth organizations. I mean, nowadays, every day there's a new organization, there's a new youth-led organization. New organizations are sprouting out every day. We already have existing ones, they are not even strengthened yet, but we want to organize new ones. So let us work with each other, let us collaborate, let us partner with the existing organizations and consolidate all of the little resources we have in the UNOY as a youth-led network of organizations around the world. We are always available to support. Currently, we are working with a mention of armed conflict and WITNET to establish another continental coordination in West Central Africa. So by that will also be able to strengthen or to support or complement UN-wide effort in bringing young people on board in terms of implementing the YPS youth. All of these organizations are always ready to support us, but we also have to consolidate our efforts, our resources. We need to collaborate and come up with a bigger plan rather than coming up with splinter groups and wanting to achieve so much in our little corners. If we work together, if we join resources, we can achieve so much rather than working in splinter groups or in our separate group. I was part of the methodological study on YPS at the Youth for Africa program there in Addis. I think it was around December 2018. I'm freaking maybe at that time you were in there, but I think Raphael was also there. Raphael is in this group, and now we have youth ambassadors, youth peace ambassador for different regions across Africa, and 35 has also called for the appointment of youth peace ambassador focal persons in the different regions. So let us follow up with the UN agencies. Let us have the necessary statistics and data. Let us work with institutions, research institutions, because if we don't have the necessary data, we will not know after 2 years, after 5 years, what we have been able to achieve. So again, let us read, let us amplify, let us echo the voice of the agenda of the YPS, and I believe that we'll be able to achieve so much if we work together. Thank you very much, Rafiu. Thank you for building Block for Peace Foundation, for organizing this session.
All right, thank you so much, Mohammed, for your sharp intervention. We'll go over to Mokhtar now, who is the AU West Africa representative on youth peace and security, for his solidarity message. Over to you, Mokhtar. Hello, Mokhtar. Is Mokhtar still here with us? All right. We also have the leader of the Federation of Liberia Student Union here. You want to add your voice briefly? Hello?
Amos, are you here?
Okay. I think we're finding it difficult to hear from both Mokhtar and Amos, who are both representative of some of the youth groups.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah.
So you getting me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, like I said initially, my name is Emmanuel Tamar. I'm the administrative assistant to the president of the Federation of Liberian Youth. And I want to say thank you so very much for the pleasant presentation that you all gave on behalf of the young people of Africa and the world. So according to the SDG of Goal 17, talks about partnership. And for us at the level of the Federation of Liberian Youth, we want to say thank you, and we look forward to more participation. Like for West here, we don't need to have more splinters group. All we need is that we need to work collaboratively as a young organization so that we can foster one piece. Because an attempt to working with so many groups and then we don't work together, it causes a serious problem for us. So we now achieve the goal that we all want to achieve. Like Africa is maybe where we are challenged when it comes to youth empowerment, capacity building, and when it comes to violence. So we need to put up our focus on Africa, most especially West Africa. We're about to go to election. What are we getting? What are the young people going to get involved with? What are some of those peace messages that young people will need to get involved with? So we look forward to having more partnership. What are the young organizations in Africa and the world so that we can foster this one peace agenda? And to conclude, I just want to say thank you so very much for having us, and we look forward to more participation.
All right. Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you to all our Nigerian colleagues on the call. Thank you to all our colleagues from Zimbabwe, from CAR, from Liberia. We appreciate you guys. And thank you for all our Nigerian speakers, Mohammed Foboy, Mafreke, Saji Prelis. They are all Nigerians. Mohammed likes Nigeria more than he likes Nigeria more than he likes Liberia. Mafreke,
that is not true.
I mean, Saji, he comes to Nigeria like he goes to, the next shop after his house. So we appreciate all you.
I grew up in Nigeria. For 10 years, so.
That is why you're Nigerian, Saji.
Yeah, Sokoto State, all the way up north, so.
That's interesting. We met 2016 in Maiduguri, and it's been very, very interesting for me to meet such an amazing leader. So we appreciate all of you. We're going to stay in touch with all the action points, all the brilliant interventions that have been out from our speakers. We hope that this is going to be the beginning of YPS debates on the continent. We hope to continue this seminar and have another one in the next 2 weeks, where we're going to be discussing another interesting topics on youth peace and security. We're counting on you to also join the conversation so that together we can strengthen the youth peace and security agenda and architecture on the continent. So we appreciate all of you. We do not take
Amos would like to talk to you. Amos.
All right, so if there is any other question, no other comments, I want to release our speakers. I want to release all our members and all our guests for joining this conversation. We appreciate you. We'll get back to you shortly. Bye.
Thank you, Rafi, for organizing. Really appreciate it. Great conversation. All the best.
Thank you, Rafi. Thank you, Sajjan. Thank you for everyone that engaged.
All
right. It's like
thank you.
It's like people do not want to leave. People do not want to leave.
We don't want to leave.
All right. Bye. Thanks. Bye.